Hello Africa, welcome to Bitesize Democracy, a weekly show focusing on issues around the African continent. Our show gives you a snapshot of what's happening in Africa in fun, informative, bite-sized segments. Please do join us in conversation. Our hashtag is #BS Democracy. Our Twitter handle is @Afrique_Democratic. And please do like our Facebook page, the African Democratic Institute. On today's show, we have Meluleki, who'll be speaking about what's happening around the African continent, with particular focus on the DRC, South Africa, and Burundi. Welcome to the show, NK.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, we're going to start off with the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo. The election has been moved from December to April 2017. So technically, President Kabila has extended his term by a few months. Is that constitutional, or how does that work?
First of all, the country has been trying to prepare for an election this year. Obviously, the opposition was excited about that, considering that it's also the incumbent's last term. So his term expires in December, and him now extending it to April next year. First of all, it's two things. First, it's unconstitutional because the Constitution allows him up to the end of this year, around December, and then him moving it on the grounds that the Electoral Commission also needs more time. When they've had all this time to prepare, it seems unfair and just a manipulation of the Constitution. That's most of what the opposition has been saying. But it's also true that DRC is a huge country. To manage a proper, credible election is a bit more complex. But when incumbents deliberately let things slide so that they extend the term, that becomes a bit of a problem. And I think that's what's happening in DRC.
Okay, is a constitutional change feasible whereby President Kabila is willing to change the constitution so he can stand for another term? Is this feasible at this point?
I mean, we've seen it in Rwanda. So it's possible that they can manipulate the constitution and extend his term. Looking at what's happening now, he has a cabal of some opposition parties that do support him. Obviously, manipulates him, give them some bit of incentives for that. That's why they have supported him in his bid to extend until April next year. So it's possible to manipulate the constitution. They can throw a referendum, they can manipulate parliament since they're the majority. So it's possible. We've seen it happen before, and it's possible that we might have Kabila for another term.
Absolutely. So we will be looking closely at that election. I will move on to Burundi and South Africa. I think last week Burundi announced that they were pulling out of the ICC, and this week South Africa has also announced that they're pulling out of the ICC. And South Africa has given the reason that the ICC is interfering with their mediation around the African continent, with particular focus on Sudan. When President Beki was sent by South Africa to go and mediate in Sudan and South Sudan, and when President al-Bashir was here and the ICC called for him to be arrested, which in some way is credible what they're saying. What do you think about that?
No, it's a pretty tough position for South Africa. First of all, it's one of the biggest economies in the country. They are considered a leader in the continent. So it's a big blow for, first of all, the ICC when a country like South Africa says they are pulling out, speaks a lot about their credibility, etc. But the position of South Africa in the continent is made pretty complex when we are forced almost to either stick by international law or consider your other brothers in the continent. And I think that's what South Africa has decided to do. Let's not, because now ICC is throwing the card of summoning South Africa. And there's been, the debate is not new. There's been a debate about the role of African countries in the ICC, the role of ICC itself, and its seeming bias towards African countries. And if you look at it statistically, it's not a bias. Most of the cases and people tried there are African. So I think for South Africa, it could be the right call right now if we envision any reform of the ICC in terms of shifting bias from Africa to almost everyone else in the world.
Okay, and then Dr. Nkosazana Zuma, the chairperson of the AUC, came out and said it's South Africa's sovereign right to pull out of the ICC. My question is she the right person, as the chairperson of the AU, is she the right person to be coming out with this message?
Yeah, she is. She's a great voice, I mean, very respected voice. Her office is very respected to the continent. And when we try to mobilize the continent around it being a formidable force and a united front, for instance, speaking against some tendencies of the ICC, for example, she's the person to do it because she's the chair of the African Union Commission. So she's a great voice, and she's right. The sovereignty trumps everything else. So it's South Africa's choice. If they decide we want out for their reasons, they have a right to do so. The role of AUC could be maybe through its different departments to advise on is this good for the continent and the implications it has. Also on countries like Kenya, who have also threatened to leave but have not explicitly said they are leaving. So she's a great voice. She has the right to speak, and I think she said the right thing.
And then we move on to Burundi. Burundi is also pulling out of the ICC. I'm not quite sure what the reasons that Burundi gave, but I guess sovereignty is playing a part in all this.
Yeah, sovereignty is the first thing, but the most important thing is Burundi has gone through a lot. If you look at they've had sanctions against some of their leaders, the chaos that's continuing, Nkurunziza and the constitution debacle that he has had. Obviously, there are a lot of lives that have been lost.
Yes.
So all that culminates to a possible persecution of the incumbent by the ICC. So it's good for him, in a sense, to pull out now, rather than when he pulls out later and then he finds himself in the same position that Uhuru and them found themselves in a while back. So it's just self-interest, and then obviously they manipulate the sovereignty of the country and the ability of Burundi to pull out of ICC.
Do you think that this South Africa and Burundi pulling out of the ICC means like there'll be an exodus of African countries leaving the ICC? I know Zimbabwe has also indicated.
Yeah, I think the debate has been rife for a while. And people have been talking a lot with less of actions, and I think the past month has seen quite bold steps by some African countries, Burundi, South Africa, and it could mean that we have to have a different conversation of how do we, as a continent, hold each other accountable for crimes against humanity. Do we now focus more on the African court, or do we, as a unit, then approach the ICC and ask for reforms so that it could be inclusive of all of us?
Because the ICC has issued a statement and said South Africa and Burundi should reconsider. So hopefully this will start a dialogue in all the reforms that Africa.
Yes, it could trigger a great dialogue that would lead us to some sort of reform, which would be great for international security and international diplomacy.
On that note, thank you so much for watching. Do join us next week for another exciting show. Goodbye.